I'd like to present a few activities today from this workbook to talk about how we can use these activities to activate vocabulary in our learners' minds and help them acquire those words through multiple activations of the same word. On page 38, we find an activity that will activate 3 words in each item. The students are told to answer science questions. They can look up words, bolded words in the dictionary if they need help, and all of those words are found in parentheses. They are the 3 vocabulary items that are being activated. And then students are supposed to circle the correct answer for each question. So this activates 3 words at a time instead of just 1. And it's working with the basic definition for these vocabulary words. So number 1, a fingerprint, flame, scale can be used to measure something's weight. In order to answer this question, students have to know the definitions for these 3 words, and they have to bring up those definitions for the 3 words in order to answer the question. So this comes from page 38 in the workbook, and the student has to read all of the words and put them in the categories of a creature, an instrument, and a metal. So the first word in the list is copper. Copper is a metal. So the student would write copper under a metal. Next is test tube. So the student would write test tube under an instrument. Now, this is adding to the depth of vocabulary knowledge for each of these words, because the student has to know that it is a creature, an instrument, or a metal, and not just the generic definition. It's actually starting to help categorize these words in the reader's mind. Now, you can instruct your students to actually do this activity in reverse, and this will help them activate the vocabulary even more. What they can do, what you can ask them to do, is to fill in all of the creatures first. So the student would then read through the first word, copper. No, that's not a creature. Test tube. No, that's not a creature. Larva. Yeah, larva is a creature, and they would write larva. They would do that for all of the creatures in the list. Then they start over for an instrument, and they say copper. No, copper's not an instrument. And so then they have to access copper for the second time before they use it. And then they go to test tube, and that's activated for the second time. And they write down test tube under instrument. They do all the instruments. Then, when they do the third category for metals, they access copper for the 3rd time before they have actually written it down. And so you can see how this increases the number of times that students have to activate that mental representation in their lexicon for this activity. Another way of classifying words is by giving them an either-or option. And so these are easy ways to contrast many words, but it's very simple for the students to answer. So on page 39, we see an example of this, where they're studying social study vocabulary, and specifically geography terms. Students are directed to read the list of terms and decide whether these terms refer to areas of land or areas of water, and then they mark that in the item. There are some activities in this book that activate many, many vocabulary words at the same time in one item, and these are really useful in helping students acquire a large group of vocabulary words or terms that you've been covering in class. And so the key to this type of item is to ask students to find 2 terms out of many terms that have a certain condition. And this requires them to read through the terms, to become familiar with the terms they're working with, and then to go back and choose the 2 that fit the requirements. So this can activate each of the terms up to 2 times for one item. This is a very efficient item. This next activity is found on page 50, and this lesson is specifically focused on the last section the last two sections of the academic word list. So the prompt includes a couple of academic word list words already, paragraph and arbitrary, and then the options to fill in the blanks are 3 more words from the academic word list. And students will have to activate all 5 of these academic word list words in order to correctly answer the item. Students will have to look at these words multiple times in order to figure out which blanks they go in. Now, they probably will use an elimination strategy like I've just shown you, but that doesn't mean that the students don't know these words. It means that they are activating each of those words several times while they're doing the item, which means that it will help them acquire these words. Frequently, at the end of lessons, Dr. Fols will have put in a section here called New Words. And it comes at the end of the lesson, and students are required to think of any new words that they have learned during the lesson. Dr. Fols asks them to write down those words and to look up the definitions of those words. This will help the students do some active acquisition on their own. Students can use these activities to activate many of the vocabulary words that they are learning in class, and specifically with a worksheet or a workbook like this, students can work on their own to answer items and then work together to correct items, which will give them even a further chance to activate vocabulary, to make connections in their mental lexicon that is necessary for the acquisition of these words.